The applause began before Serena Williams had struck a single ball. On June 30th, 2026, she walked onto Wimbledon's centre court at 44 years old, nearly 4 years after her last professional singles match. The familiar details were still there, the focused eyes, the deliberate walk, the racket held firmly in her right hand. But the woman entering the court was no longer carrying the same burden. For most of her career, Serena played as though every match were a trial. She had records to chase, critics to silence, and an entire history pressing against her shoulders. This time, she had returned for something more personal. Her daughters were watching. Olympia was old enough to understand that her mother had once ruled these courts. Adira, born in 2023, was still too young to grasp what the crowd was celebrating. Serena had spent years trying to balance tennis with motherhood. Now she wanted her children to witness a part of her life they had mostly known through photographs, old recordings, and stories told by other people. Before returning to competition at Queen's Club that June, Serena admitted that she missed the atmosphere and the travel. Tennis had shaped nearly every year she could remember. Walking away in 2022 had given her freedom, but it had also removed the rhythm that had organized her life since childhood. She no longer woke up knowing that every meal, flight, and training session was leading toward the next tournament. There were school schedules now, business meetings, bedtime routines, family mornings that did not begin with a practice court. For years, Serena had said that she was not retiring. She was evolving away from tennis. It sounded graceful, but evolution proved more complicated than the word suggested. She became a mother of 2. She expanded Serena Ventures, the investment company she had built to support founders often overlooked by traditional financing. She entered new rooms where nobody cared how fast she could serve. She invested in women's sports and joined the ownership group of Toronto's WNBA franchise. Her life became crowded with meaningful work, yet tennis remained somewhere inside her. In a 2025 interview, Serena acknowledged that she still missed competing and believed she remained physically capable of winning. That thought did not mean she wanted to return to the old life. She had already chosen family over the endless pursuit of a 24th major championship, but missing tennis was different from regretting the decision to leave it. That distinction became clearer in 2026. When she announced her return, Serena refused to frame it as a desperate attempt to correct an unfinished career. She had won 23 Grand Slam singles titles, 73 tour-level singles trophies, and 4 Olympic gold medals. She had nothing left to prove. At Queen's Club, she said she was trying not to place pressure on herself. She wanted to experience the tour differently, with her family beside her. For perhaps the first time, the score was not the only measure of whether the journey had been worthwhile. That freedom was tested at Wimbledon. Across the net stood Maya Joint, an Australian player 24 years younger than Serena. Joint belonged to a generation that had grown up watching Williams dominate. Serena was no longer facing one of her familiar rivals. She was facing evidence of how much time had passed. The match became harder than nostalgia could make it appear. Serena's serve still produced flashes of the old intimidation. Her instincts remained sharp. Under pressure, she saved match points and forced a deciding set. For several minutes, centre court began to believe that the years away might not matter. But they did. Joint moved more easily and recovered more quickly. Serena fought through 3 sets before losing 6-3, 6-7, 6-3. The result ended her Wimbledon singles comeback in the opening round. Yet the crowd did not react as though it had witnessed an ordinary defeat. People stood because they understood what the afternoon represented. They were not simply applauding a former champion. They were watching a woman return to the place that had defined her, without allowing that place to control her again. At 44, Serena could finally leave centre court without carrying the humiliation she once attached to losing. Her daughters were there. Her family was waiting. The life outside the stadium no longer felt like an interruption between tournaments. It had become the center of everything. But Serena's return also revealed something she had not fully said when she walked away in 2022. The applause may end. The rankings may disappear and younger players may take your place, but the identity built across a lifetime does not vanish so easily. To understand why Serena came back, we have to look at the years when she tried to discover who she was without tennis, and why leaving the game proved almost as difficult as conquering it. Leaving professional tennis did not give Serena Williams the quiet life many people imagined. After her final match at the 2022 US Open, she no longer had tournaments deciding where she would wake up each week. There were no ranking points to defend and no practice schedules built around the next opponent. Yet the discipline of nearly 3 decades could not simply be switched off. For the first time since childhood, Serena had to create a life without a scoreboard. That transition began with the reason she had stepped away: her family. Serena had openly written that the decision was painful, because men in professional sports rarely had to choose between expanding their families and continuing their careers. She wanted another child, but she also understood what pregnancy could demand from her body. The memory of Olympia's birth in September 2017 had never disappeared. Serena developed a pulmonary embolism after the cesarean delivery and required several medical procedures. She later described repeatedly raising concerns because she recognized the symptoms from an earlier blood clot. Recovery kept her in bed for weeks. Choosing another pregnancy meant confronting those memories. At the 2023 Met Gala, Serena revealed that she and her husband, Alexis Ohanian, were expecting again. In August, their second daughter, Adira River Ohanian, was born. This time, Serena was no longer preparing for a return to Grand Slam tennis. She could stay home without counting the days until she needed to rebuild her ranking. She could experience motherhood without treating recovery as another race against time. Still, family life brought its own pressure. Serena had spent years being judged publicly whenever her body changed. After Adira's birth, she spoke more openly about accepting herself during recovery. Photographs she shared were not always polished images of the invincible athlete people remembered. Sometimes they showed exhaustion, vulnerability, and the ordinary physical reality of becoming a mother again in her 40s. The honesty mattered because Serena's body had once been discussed as if it belonged to everyone else. Commentators had analyzed its size, strength, and appearance throughout her career. Away from competition, she began reclaiming the right to describe it in her own terms. Her daughters also changed the meaning of time. During Olympia's early childhood, Serena tried not to remain away from her for more than 24 hours. That rule was difficult for someone accustomed to international travel, yet it reflected a sacrifice she had long wanted to make. Tennis had given her almost everything, but it had also consumed thousands of mornings, weekends, and family occasions. Now she was present for smaller moments that would never appear in a record book. There were piano lessons, school activities, bedtime routines, and conversations with a daughter, beginning to understand why strangers recognized her mother. Olympia did not inherit Serena's childhood. There were no cracked public courts in Compton, and no father directing practice sessions before sunrise. Her life came with security Serena's family had fought to create. That difference carried its own responsibility. Serena wanted her daughters to understand effort without having to experience the hardship that had shaped her. She wanted them to be confident without believing fame made them more important than anyone else. Those lessons could not be taught through trophies alone. Meanwhile, the athlete who had once measured success in championships began measuring it in presence. But even as motherhood filled the space tennis had occupied, Serena discovered that leaving competition had not erased her competitive nature. It had merely pushed it toward a different arena, one where the victories were quieter, the risks were financial, and the people depending on her were no longer sitting in a stadium. The meetings did not resemble center court. There were no line judges, no crowd holding its breath, and no scoreboard telling Serena Williams whether she was ahead. Instead, there were founders describing unfinished products, uncertain markets, and ideas that might take years to succeed. Serena understood that kind of risk. She had begun investing long before her final professional match. In 2014, she quietly started placing money into young companies through what eventually became Serena Ventures. At first, it was not presented as a grand second career. Serena was still traveling the world, training for major tournaments and trying to remain number one, but she had noticed something troubling. Many talented women and minority entrepreneurs were struggling to receive serious attention from investors. Serena recognized the feeling of entering a room where the people making decisions did not expect someone like you to lead it. She had spent much of her tennis career challenging old assumptions about who could dominate the sport. Investing offered her another place to question those assumptions. The work required a different kind of patience. In tennis, Serena could study an opponent, prepare a strategy, and see the result within hours. Business rarely offered such immediate answers. A promising company could struggle for years. A confident founder could make the wrong decision. An idea Serena believed in could still fail. Losing money was not the same as losing a match, but it tested a familiar part of her personality. Serena had always hated losing. She now had to learn that good judgment did not guarantee a perfect outcome. When Serena announced in 2022 that she was moving away from professional tennis, she also made clear that Serena Ventures would become a larger part of her life. The firm had raised a $111 million fund and focused on early-stage businesses, including companies led by founders often overlooked by traditional venture capital. For Serena, this was not charity. She believed underestimated founders could build valuable companies precisely because they understood customers and problems that established investors sometimes ignored. Her name opened doors, but the decisions still demanded research, discipline, and the willingness to be wrong. That last part was difficult. On the court, Serena had trusted her instincts almost instantly. She knew when to attack a weak second serve or change direction during a rally. In an investment meeting, instinct was only the beginning. She had to listen, ask questions, and sometimes allow other people to know more than she did. It was a humbling adjustment for someone who had spent years as the most powerful person in her profession. Sports ownership soon became another part of her life after tennis. Serena already held interests connected to the Miami Dolphins and Angel City FC. In March 2025, she joined the ownership group of the Toronto Tempo, the WNBA's first Canadian franchise. The team was scheduled to begin playing in 2026, giving Serena a role in building a new organization rather than joining one with decades of established history. The investment carried personal meaning. Serena knew how women's sports had changed during her lifetime. She remembered competing when female athletes were often treated as secondary attractions. She had fought for equal prize money and greater respect. Now she could help shape opportunities from the ownership side. Yet success away from tennis created an unexpected question. Was Serena building a new life because she truly wanted it, or because she did not know how to stop competing? Her calendar remained crowded. Family, investments, fashion, public appearances, and sports ownership filled the space once occupied by tournaments. She was no longer chasing Grand Slam trophies, but she was still moving from one challenge to another. The silence after competition had frightened many retired athletes. Serena answered it by staying busy, but eventually, even the strongest champion has to sit still long enough to hear what the silence is trying to say. For most of Serena Williams' life, physical discomfort was something to overcome. A sore shoulder could be treated, a strained muscle could be protected. Fatigue could be pushed aside until the final point. Professional tennis had taught her to distinguish ordinary pain from danger, and that awareness had already helped save her life more than once. Retirement did not end the need to remain watchful. In 2024, Serena noticed a lump on the right side of her neck. Medical testing determined that it was a branchial cyst. She initially chose not to have it removed, but the mass continued growing. By the time doctors operated, Serena said it had reached the size of a small grapefruit. The cyst was benign, but the experience brought her back to an uncomfortable lesson. Even after competition, she could not assume that strength meant safety. She had to pay attention, ask questions, and make decisions before a manageable problem became more serious. For Serena, medical self-advocacy was deeply personal. In 2011, she survived a pulmonary embolism after blood clots traveled to her lungs. Following Olympia's birth in September 2017, Serena recognized the familiar symptoms and asked hospital staff for a CT scan and blood-thinning medication. Testing confirmed another pulmonary embolism. Additional complications led to surgeries and a difficult recovery that kept her largely confined to bed for 6 weeks. She later shared the story because she understood how differently it could have ended. Serena's wealth and fame had given her access to excellent medical care, yet she still felt she had to insist that something was wrong. Her experience became part of a larger conversation about women, particularly Black women, struggling to have their symptoms taken seriously. Years later, she continued encouraging women to listen to their bodies rather than dismissing exhaustion, pain, or sudden changes as ordinary parts of life. She wanted Olympia and Adira to grow up believing that asking for help was not weakness. Serena had spent decades teaching the world what physical power looked like. Now she was teaching her daughters that awareness could be just as important. Aging also changed the way she approached fitness. During her career, training had been designed around performance. Every movement supported speed, endurance, or recovery. After leaving the tour, exercise no longer had to prepare her for a 3-hour match. It became connected to health, energy, and the ability to remain active with her children. That adjustment was not always comfortable. Serena knew exactly what her body had once been capable of doing. She remembered chasing balls into the corners, recovering between points, and producing serves that opponents could barely touch. Comparing her present body with that version of herself could have become another form of punishment. Instead, she began speaking publicly about accepting physical change. She shared imperfect moments and acknowledged the difficulty of rediscovering herself after tennis and pregnancy. The message was quieter than the roar that followed a Wimbledon victory, but perhaps more useful to women who had also watched their bodies change through childbirth, illness, and age. At 44, Serena was not trying to preserve the appearance of the young champion forever. She was learning to care for the woman who remained. That lesson would influence the decision that surprised the tennis world, because after years of saying family had become her priority, Serena began wondering whether she could return to competition without surrendering the life she had built away from it. For nearly 4 years, Serena Williams lived with a question she could not completely silence. Could she still do it? She had stepped away from professional tennis after the 2022 US Open, but she had never used the word retirement comfortably. She called it an evolution. At the time, the distinction seemed mostly emotional, a way of leaving without declaring that the door had been permanently closed. Then, late in 2025, her name appeared in the sport's registered testing pool. Players usually must re-enter that system before returning to official competition. Serena initially dismissed the growing speculation. When interviewers asked about a comeback in January 2026, she avoided giving them a clear answer. She said she was a full-time mother. She smiled. She changed the subject. But somewhere away from the cameras, she was training. The preparation was different from the work she had done during her championship years. Serena was 44 now. She had given birth twice, undergone multiple surgeries, and spent years away from the physical demands of the tour. Her body needed more recovery. Every movement had to be rebuilt carefully. She was not trying to become the 20-year-old version of herself again. That woman belonged to another time. Instead, Serena wanted to discover what remained after age. Motherhood and distance had changed her. The answer arrived in June 2026, when she returned to professional tennis at Queen's Club in London. She began in doubles beside 19-year-old Canadian Victoria Mboko. The partnership itself showed how far the sport had traveled. Mboko had been born years after Serena won her first Grand Slam singles title. She belonged to a generation that had studied Serena through recordings and childhood memories. Now they were sharing the same side of the net. The crowd rose when Serena appeared. The sound was familiar, but her relationship with it had changed. During her prime, applause often brought expectation. People cheered because they believed she should win. At Queen's, they cheered because she had returned at all. The first match offered brief reminders of her old authority. Serena struck serves near 120 miles per hour and produced a backhand winner that drew one of the loudest reactions of the afternoon. She and Mboko defeated Nicole Melichar-Martinez and Erin Routliffe in straight sets. Serena gave herself a C- afterward. That was the old competitor speaking. Even after 4 years away, she immediately noticed everything that could have been sharper: the footwork, the timing. The decisions made half a second too late. She could appreciate the victory, but she could not stop evaluating herself. Her daughters were watching from the stands, although Serena joked that they appeared more interested in food and toys than in the significance of their mother's return. That ordinary family detail made the afternoon different from every comeback she had attempted before. Once, Serena returned because she needed to reclaim her ranking. Now she had returned while remaining a mother first. The decision to play Wimbledon singles came later. Serena accepted a wildcard and entered the tournament knowing she would face women young enough to have grown up idolizing her. She did not promise a championship. She did not speak about tying the record of 24 major singles titles. When asked why she had come back, her answer was simple: why not? It was a freedom Serena had rarely enjoyed in her career. For decades, every choice had been examined for historical meaning. Every tournament became part of a debate about records, greatness, or decline. At 44, she was finally playing because she missed the experience. Still, center court demanded honesty. Her first-round opponent, Maya Joint, was 20 years old and more accustomed to the speed of the modern tour. Serena's instincts survived, but instinct could not erase 4 seasons away. Joint moved with the ease of someone whose body recovered between points without negotiation. Serena lost the opening set. Then she fought through the second, saving match points and forcing a deciding set. For a while, the old tension returned to Wimbledon. The crowd leaned forward. Every powerful serve seemed to pull another memory from the past. People remembered the 7 singles trophies. They remembered the white dresses, the clenched fist, and the walk toward the baseline when a match became difficult. They remembered watching Serena and Venus transform the sport on courts where tradition had once seemed immovable. But memory could not play the third set for her. Joint eventually won 6-3, 6-7, 6-3. Serena had lost, yet the defeat did not resemble the painful finals that once stayed with her for months. There was disappointment, certainly. Competitors do not suddenly become indifferent, but there was also perspective. Her children were waiting. Her businesses would continue. Her marriage, her health, and the life she had built outside tennis would still be there the following morning. For most of her career, losing had made the world feel smaller. This time, Serena walked away knowing her world had become much larger than the court. The comeback did not prove that age was meaningless. It proved the opposite. Age mattered. Time away mattered. A changing body mattered. But none of those things erased the desire to return to a place that had once felt like home. Serena was not attempting to rewrite the ending of 2022. She was revisiting the game on different terms, free from the obligation to dominate everyone standing across the net. For the first time, tennis could be part of her life without becoming all of it. And as she left Wimbledon, another question replaced the one that had followed her for 4 years. Not whether she could still win, whether she finally understood that she no longer needed to. When Serena Williams walked away from center court in 2026, the scene felt familiar and completely new. The crowd was standing again. Cameras followed every step. Her name rolled through the stadium, as it had during the greatest years of her career. Yet Serena was no longer leaving the court with her entire identity tied to the result. She had returned at 44 and discovered that tennis could still challenge her, frustrate her, and awaken the competitor she had never truly lost. But it could no longer take everything from her. There was a family waiting beyond the tunnel. Olympia had grown old enough to understand why thousands of strangers cheered for her mother. Adira was still discovering the world Serena had built before she was born. Alexis Ohanian remained beside them, supporting a woman whose ambition had never required him to become smaller or ask her to be less visible. For most of Serena's life, home had been the place she visited between tournaments. Now tennis had become something she could visit before returning home. That reversal may be the most important part of what happened to her after the applause faded. She did not disappear. She became an investor, a team owner, and an advocate for women's health. Through Serena Ventures, she supported founders who knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Through her involvement in women's sports, including the Toronto Tempo, she helped create opportunities for athletes who would compete in a world Serena had helped change. Her influence was no longer measured only in trophies. It could be seen in the confidence of younger players who entered major tournaments believing that power, emotion, and ambition did not need to be hidden. It could be seen in the growing value of women's sports and in the athletes demanding to be treated as serious professionals. Serena had spent years forcing institutions to adjust to her presence. The generation that followed did not have to begin from the same place. Still, No legacy can protect a person from time. At 44, Serena understood that her body required more patience than it once had. Recovery took longer. Training demanded careful decisions. The speed and endurance that once appeared automatic now required negotiation. She did not pretend otherwise. That honesty made her return more meaningful. Serena was not trying to convince the world that aging could be defeated. She was showing that age did not erase curiosity, ambition, or the right to begin again. Her 24th Grand Slam singles title may never come. For years, that missing number followed her everywhere. Every major tournament became another chance to equal Margaret Court's record. Every defeat produced the same questions. Had Serena waited too long? Had motherhood changed her? Would history remember the one title she did not win? Time has made those questions seem smaller. 23 major singles championships remain one of the greatest records in modern sport. But the numbers cannot fully describe the woman who earned them. They do not show the child practicing on public courts under the direction of a father whose dream was mocked before it was celebrated. They do not show the grief after the killing of her sister, Yetunde Price. They do not show the fear of pulmonary embolisms, the complications after childbirth, or the strength required to insist that doctors listen. They do not show the private cost of being treated as a symbol every time she simply wanted to compete. Serena was asked to represent strength for so long that people sometimes forgot strength has consequences. It can become a role a person feels unable to leave. It can make vulnerability seem like failure. Motherhood gave Serena permission to put that role down. Her daughters did not need an invincible champion. They needed a present mother. They needed someone who could teach them that confidence includes asking for help, that achievement does not replace health, and that a woman may change direction without apologizing for the life she chooses. Perhaps that is why Serena's story feels different today. The young woman remembered by millions was always moving toward the next trophy. The woman she became learned that a meaningful life could also be built from ordinary mornings, unfinished plans, and moments that no television camera would record. She is still competitive, she is still ambitious. She may never be entirely finished with tennis, but Serena Williams no longer needs a stadium to confirm who she is. What happened after the applause ended was not a collapse, a disappearance, or a lonely retreat from greatness. Serena carried her discipline into business, her influence into women's sports, and her deepest attention into her family. The champion remained. She simply became more than the game that introduced her to the world. And when you remember Serena Williams years from now, which moment will stay with you most? The trophies she lifted, the battles she survived, or the courage it took to choose a new life? Share your memory in the comments and subscribe for more stories about the legends whose lives continued long after the crowd went home.